Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1790 AN. Today's date is February 13th, 2019, and the title of the episode is The Call Goes Out, the Move Against the Central Banks Begin. Now, before we get started, have you ever noticed down at your local supermarket the staff are getting older? The older generation needs to work, and really you have to ask why it changed. The only reason that you're going to be working into your retirement is that you didn't save enough, or what you saved didn't work hard enough for you. Retirement doesn't come cheap, so you need to do something different, something which beats inflation, not just keeps pace with it. Now, precious metals have proved time and time again they smash inflation and rising costs. So call Noble Gold Investments at 877-646-5347. Or fill out the link below to receive the free gold and silver investment guide. Let's get into the economic collapse financial news. Now, we know the Brexit deal is not going the way the central bank wants, and this is why they're using fear tactics to try to get their way, to scare the people, to try to scare the government officials into doing what they want. But what's happening right now is that there's a lot of countries, they're starting to wake up, and the people are starting to wake up, and they're starting to realize that the central bank, they are the source of the problem. And we're seeing that Italy now, they are calling for a restructuring or the removal of the central bank. And I'm talking about all the key personnel within the central bank, and we'll be getting into that in just a minute. The other thing that's very interesting is that out of the TBAC minutes, it seems like they were mentioning and discussing how the Federal Reserve note might not be the reserve currency of the world. And they were kind of like joking about it, but again, were they really joking, or do they know something we don't? And we'll be getting into that in just a minute. But first, out in Europe, we can see that the economy out in Europe is completely breaking down. They might be the world's weakest link when we hit the economic recession, depression, collapse of the central bank system. And once again, you need to remember, here in the United States, when you see all the data coming in for the economy, and Trump is telling us how great the economy is, this is an illusion. He's using these weapons against the central bankers. Remember, we're still in a central bank economy. We're still dealing in the Federal Reserve note. The Federal Reserve note is the reserve currency around the world, and the Rothschilds still control all the central banks around the world. But Europe is having a very difficult time, and what's very different about Europe to the United States, the central bank is here in the United States. We can continually create currency, borrow, and spend. The EU, with the ECB, they are made up of many nations, something like 19 nations. And they don't have the power just to continually borrow and borrow and borrow and borrow, because they're hooked into many different nations using one central bank system. Yes, they all have their own little central bank within their country, but their main source of currency is coming from the ECB. But what we're seeing right now is we're seeing the economy deteriorate in many of these countries. And industrial production across the 19-nation euro area is falling at its fastest pace since the financial crisis. And we can see that this is going to be a big problem. This leaves Europe's GDP at a risk for barely reaching 1% in 2019, a sharp slowdown from 2018. And even with Germany, the powerhouse of all this, it is not helping. They're on the verge or already in a recession. The euro area economic numbers have consistently missed every single forecast. This is not a good sign. And we know, and we've been talking about this, we've been researching it, we know the truth about the economy. This economy is an illusion. And we know that Trump and many others, they're preparing to make a move on the central bank system. We cannot stay in the central banking system the way it is today. It will not work. It's not designed to work. The central bankers know this. Now, Trump is doing everything he possibly can. He's doing a fantastic job bringing jobs back, bringing manufacturing back, and getting people off of the various programs and making them dependent on the government. And he has to do this. Remember, throughout the entire time the central bank came into power, they continually created programs which the American people became dependent on government. Now, the founding fathers never wanted this. And we can see with the various programs, welfare, food stamps, and whatnot, they needed to do this because the central bank system does not work for everyone. You have different levels, and most of the people, well, they knew that it was not going to work for them, so they had to create these programs to allow these people to live. And if they're dependent on government and they're getting their check and they're getting their food stamps and they're getting everything else, they won't say a word. It's much easier to control the people. But right now, more than 1.4 million households dropped off the food stamps since Trump came into office. What does this tell us? This tells us there's a lot less people that are dependent on government. Now, can he just get rid of all the people and make them all not dependent on government? No, that would be impossible, but he needs to reduce the numbers quite a bit. And there's a reason for this, because when we move to a new system, you don't want the people dependent on a government. Actually, Q explains this in post 2682. This is February 10th. They do not want you to think for yourself. A free-thinking, logical person who draws conclusions based on facts are, put simply, a threat to their control, power, grip. All they care about is control and power. With control comes personal gain. They want to keep you poor and in need of government assistance. Bigger the government, the more control they have, the more power they possess. When you're in need, you are weak. When you are weak, you are not strong. When you are not strong, you do not fight back. This is as real as it gets. And Q is telling us right there and then, this was their plan from the beginning. Keep the people weak. Keep them dependent. If we do this, and this is coming from the deep state, from the central bankers, we can control the people. Why do you think in countries in Europe, the central bank pushes austerity? It's controlling the people. It's keeping them down, making them weak. If you keep them weak, they can't fight back. Now, we know that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is pushing this new Green Deal. And Howard Schultz, he is out there and he is ripping this apart. Now, he's the Starbucks chairman. And he is saying that, listen, we need to be truthful about these environmental goals. Instead of just throwing out ideas against the wall and these great slogans that you come up with, we need to have truth. He said, I read that by 2030, they're suggesting that every building in America becomes clean energy, conforms to clean energy. Just to put that in perspective, because it's not realistic, that would mean that between 2,000 and 3,000 buildings a day would have to be reconstructed to conform to what they're saying. He said, I don't understand how you're going to give a job for everybody. How are you going to give free college to everybody? How are you going to create clean energy throughout the country in every building of the land? I think it's immoral to suggest that we can tally up 20, 30, 40, 50 trillion of debt to solve a problem that could be solved in a different way. It's true. These are pipe dreams. These are the mission of a deep state central bank system. Borrow the money and allow everyone to live. And we have complete control over everyone. Think about what we just said previously and what Q has told us. If everyone is getting paid for and everyone is going to school and the government is paying for everything, supporting everyone, they control the people. If we continually borrow money, the country goes into debt. The central banks control the country because you owe all this debt back to the central bank. This is a no-win situation. This is not a good plan. This is a plan that the elite have come up with a long time ago. It's not going to work. So Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, he said, you know what? Let's put the new Green Deal to a vote. Let's bring it up in the Senate and let the Republicans, the Democrats, take a position on this legislation. Let's see where everyone stands. And this is going to be very interesting. Now, Adam Schiff, as we call him, the little leaker, he took a shot at Trump's tax policies. And he tweeted out the following. Who could have predicted that middle-class Americans would be in for a big disappointment when their tax refunds came this year? Who would have thought that the GOP tax cut would only benefit the wealthy and not working families? Everyone, we all saw this coming. Well, he's not exactly right. He's kind of misleading the American public. Now, Senator Kamala Harris, she also came out and said, listen, everyone's getting a smaller refund, and this is because of the tax cuts. It's a middle-class tax hike. And this is a really bad policy because everyone's getting smaller refund checks. Well, if you really do the math and you really look at what's going on, you can see they're completely wrong. Think about what has happened here. 2/3 of American households got a tax cut this year. For middle-class families with children, over 80% got tax cuts. A smaller refund check merely indicates that early tax filers overpaid their taxes by a smaller amount throughout the year. In other words, taxpayers kept more of their money they earned. That is, money they did not owe to the federal government. A larger refund check might seem like a bonus to some taxpayers, but it is merely a sign that taxes were overpaid during the year. Essentially, a taxpayer who gets a large refund gave an interest-free loan to the government. That money would have been better used if it had gone toward paying down bills or been saved in a bank that paid interest. And we know that there's not much interest in a bank today, but it would have been better off if it was in your own hands. You can pay bills, you can put it back into the economy. And Trump Jr. pointed this out in a reply to Harris. Of course refunds are down. People are paying less in taxes, and the code is simplified. A refund means you overpaid and got money back. When you pay less, the refund will be less. Do you really not understand that? Now, do the effect of proposed Dem tax hikes has on income? I guess all these individuals took Common Core math because they can't figure out these simplified problems here. Now, we know that Trump, he's been contradicting the Fed, and I do believe that he is in control of the Fed. Q has been telling us that the Fed is going to be restructured and gold is going to bring down the Fed. What's very interesting is that Italy's Salvini, he's calling for the end of Italy's central bank. He's calling for the elimination of the central bank and prison time for fraudsters. Now, the message that went out, some people are saying that, well, it was translated, incorrectly. He might be saying that we should restructure the central bank. But yes, those fraudsters should still go to prison. But what he's really saying, he's saying, listen, we need to take the corruption out of this. I mean, if we have to get rid of all the people and restructure it, so be it. I believe that's almost the same thing Q was saying, that there's going to be a restructuring. Remember, the source of the corruption comes from the free creation of currency with no checks and balances. And that is the Federal Reserve, the ECB, and all the central banks throughout the world. Remember, Q has been telling us that all these central banks are Rothschild controlled. There's a reason why Q has been telling us this. Now, something very interesting, the Treasury Borrowing Advisory Committee, they published minutes to its quarterly refunding decision 2 weeks ago. And the most interesting part of the discussion was the unique challenges faced by the Treasury over the medium term, especially the possibility of significant financing gaps over the next 10 years, amounting to over $12 trillion, and the potential need for more domestic investor participation if foreign reserve growth slows, which means that many countries are not purchasing treasuries and they're dumping treasuries. So the TBAC is also increasingly worried that foreign investors already hold significant dollar debt, which is why the U.S. will have to increasingly rely on domestic savings to fund its future budget deficit. And here, the TBAC made a surprising, tongue-in-cheek observation, namely that the reserve managers have been gradually increasing allocation to other currencies, and that the USD, the US dollar, share of FX reserves has steadily come down from 72% in 2000 to 62% now, even though the US dollar is still the dominant reserve currency. Needless to say, it seems like they were joking, but were they really joking? Because you never question the reserve status. It's generally frowned upon, and people don't like to talk about it. And you can see throughout time that other countries, when they were the reserve currency, well, all of a sudden, one day, it just came to an end. And it won't be the first time, it won't be the last time. Just ask any of the countries which have enjoyed the reserve currency status for decades and can print their way out of trouble until one day, poof, it was all gone. And if you look at some of these countries, it's Britain, it's France, Netherlands, Spain, Portugal. So let me continue here. In a blog post on the New York Fed Liberty Street Economics website, the researchers of the U.S. Central Bank doubled down on the snide observations made by the TBAC when they addressed the potential implications for the United States if the dollar global role changed. And we, quote, noted that the currency might not retain its dominance forever. It was never meant to be. The central bank system always implodes on itself after a certain period of time. And if you look back in history, it's between 40 and 50 years. We are there now. We came onto the petrodollar system. They took us off the gold standard. And since 1971 until now, they've just been printing like crazy. We're on a petrodollar system. And they've been manipulating data, taking control of the economy. But eventually what happens, everything comes to an end. And I do believe that once Trump is in his second term, this is when they're going to make their move on the central bank system. This is when we're going to see a lot of things change, and they're going to do it very, very quickly. So get prepared for the transition, get ready, because we're already seeing hints that this is going to happen. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.